"Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we can't offer full-service packing with your budget," the young man behind the counter said, his eyes barely meeting mine. "Cash payments make corporate nervous about covering damages. Best we can do is basic transport. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I stood there in my faded jeans and old Georgetown University sweatshirt, feeling every bit the broke retiree they assumed I was. The manila envelope in my hands contained exactly $3,700 in bills, my entire savings scraped together to move my late mother's belongings across 3 states. They didn't know those bills represented months of choosing between groceries and gas, between medication and dignity. What happened next in that cramped office in Riverside, Illinois, changed everything I thought I knew about respect, recognition, and the power of one person willing to stand up when it matters most. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in my small apartment in Riverside, Illinois. I'd been living there for 8 months since Mom passed, trying to figure out what to do with a lifetime of memories packed into her old farmhouse 200 miles south in Carbondale. The house had finally sold, and I had exactly 1 week to clear out everything before the new owners took possession. At 62, I should have been able to hire professionals without thinking twice about the cost. But 3 years of caring for Mom during her final illness had drained every retirement account I'd built over 30 years of service. The medical bills, the specialists, the equipment she needed, the time I took off work. It all added up to a simple equation. I was broke. I'd called 6 moving companies that morning. 5 of them hung up when I mentioned cash payment. The 6th, Hartwell Family Moving, agreed to meet with me, though the receptionist's tone suggested I was wasting their time. Their office sat wedged between a tire shop and a check-cashing place on Route 34, the kind of strip mall that had seen better decades. The waiting area smelled like coffee that had been brewing since the Clinton administration, and the chairs looked like they'd been salvaged from a doctor's office circa 1985. I sat there for 20 minutes before anyone acknowledged my existence. When Derek finally called my name, I followed him to a desk that served as the consultation area. He looked about 25, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the company logo, his hair perfectly styled and his attitude perfectly dismissive. He glanced at the intake form I'd filled out, then at me, then back at the form with obvious skepticism. "So you're looking to move from Carbondale to where exactly?" he asked, though he was reading it right off the paper. "Here, Riverside. My mother's estate needs to be packed and transported. It's a 3-bedroom house, full basement, 40 years of accumulation." Derek typed something into his computer, frowning at the screen. "Carbondale to Riverside, that's about 230 miles. Full service pack and transport for a 3-bedroom. He paused, calculating. "We're looking at minimum 4,800, probably closer to 5,500 depending on what we find." I opened the manila envelope and placed it on his desk. "I have 3,700 in cash." Derek stared at the envelope like I'd just laid a dead fish in front of him. "Ma'am, that's not even close to covering full service." "I understand it's short," I said carefully, "but this is everything I have. Could we work something out? Maybe I could pack some of the smaller items myself?" "Our insurance doesn't cover partial packing arrangements," Derek replied, already shaking his head. "Too much liability if something gets damaged. Plus, cash payments," he trailed off, shrugging. "Plus, cash payments, what?" "Look, no offense, but corporate has policies about large cash transactions. Too many people claim damages later, say we broke something valuable, try to get money they never paid in the first place." Heat rose in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not trying to scam anyone. This is my mother's house. These are family heirlooms, photographs, furniture that's been in our family for generations. I just need help moving it safely." Derek's expression softened slightly, but his resolve didn't budge. "I get it, I really do, but the best I can offer with cash payment is basic transport. You pack everything yourself, we load it and drive it. 3,700 would cover that, barely." I sat back in the uncomfortable chair, processing what he was telling me. Pack a 3-bedroom house myself. At 62, with arthritis in both hands and a back that reminded me daily of too many years carrying heavy equipment across rough terrain. Pack 40 years of my mother's life into boxes. alone, in 1 week. How much time would I have to pack? I asked quietly. Our next available window is this Friday. Truck arrives at 8 a.m. You need to be ready for loading by 9. We can't wait around if you're not packed. 4 days. 4 days to sort through a lifetime. To decide what memories were worth keeping and which ones had to be left behind. 4 days to do the work that would normally take their 3-man crew 2 full days. I looked down at my hands, at the wedding ring I still wore, though Bill had been gone 6 years now, at the small scar across my knuckles from a training accident in 1987. These hands had once commanded the respect of soldiers twice my size. Now they just looked old, arthritic, incapable of the task ahead. "Ma'am?" Derek's voice pulled me back to the present. "I need to know if you want to book the basic transport." I nodded slowly. "Yes." Friday at 8 a.m. Derek typed rapidly, printed out a contract, and slid it across the desk with a pen. "Sign at the bottom. Payment in full on Friday morning before we load." I signed Margaret Carter in careful script, the same signature I'd used on countless military documents over 3 decades. Derek barely glanced at it before filing the contract away. "Any questions about the terms?" he asked, already standing to signal the meeting was over. "Just one. If I'm not ready by 9, you really leave?" "Company policy. We've got 2 other jobs scheduled that day. Can't hold up the whole route for one customer." I gathered my purse in the manila envelope, now noticeably lighter after paying the required deposit. "I'll be ready." Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of impossibility settling on my shoulders. 4 days to pack a house that contained Mom's entire adult life. Her china cabinet full of dishes she'd inherited from her mother. Dad's workshop in the basement, still exactly as he'd left it when he passed in 2003. The attic full of Christmas decorations, photo albums, boxes of letters from my military deployments. I sat in my Honda Civic for a long moment before starting the engine, staring at the Hartwell family moving sign. The company's slogan read, "Moving families forward since 1987. I wondered if they'd ever actually helped a family, or if they just moved their belongings from one place to another while the family fell apart in the process. The drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes through afternoon traffic. 40 minutes to plan an impossible week. I'd need boxes, lots of them. Packing tape, bubble wrap, newspaper for wrapping fragile items. I'd need to rent a trailer to haul what the moving truck couldn't fit. I'd need to work 18-hour days and hope my body could handle the strain. Most of all, I'd need to do it alone. My sister lived in Oregon with her own health problems. My children were scattered across the country with their own responsibilities, their own mortgages and car payments, and lives that didn't include flying to Illinois to help pack up Grandma's house. I'd told them I had it handled, that I'd hired professionals. Pride, maybe, or just the inability to admit that their strong, independent mother needed help. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to create a strategy. Living room first, then dining room, then bedrooms. Save the basement and attic for last, hope I had enough energy left to tackle them. Pack one room completely before moving to the next. Label everything clearly. Pray I didn't break anything irreplaceable. The next morning, Wednesday, I drove to Carbondale with my Honda loaded with empty boxes and packing supplies. The house looked smaller than I remembered. More fragile somehow, as if Mom's absence had aged it years in just months. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence that had replaced her voice, her laughter, her presence that had filled these rooms for 43 years. I started in the living room, wrapping each piece of Mom's porcelain figurine collection individually, placing them carefully in boxes with enough padding to survive a minor earthquake. Each piece held a memory. The shepherdess she'd bought on her honeymoon. The angel I'd sent her from Germany during my first deployment. The tiny carousel horses she'd collected every Christmas until she had enough for a small parade. By noon, I'd packed half the living room and my back was already screaming. By evening, I'd finished the room but used twice as many boxes as I'd estimated. I drove back to Riverside with a growing sense of panic. At this rate, I'd need 8 days, not 4. Thursday blurred past in a haze of newspaper and tape and cardboard. I packed Mom's bedroom, sorting through closets full of clothes that still smelled like her perfume. I found the box she'd kept on her dresser, the one containing every letter I'd ever written to her during my military career. 28 years of letters, from basic training through my final assignment at the Pentagon. She'd saved them all. I sat on her bed holding those letters, remembering the young woman who'd written them. Second Lieutenant Carter, so eager to prove herself worthy of the uniform. Captain Carter, writing from Kosovo about the children who had nothing but still shared their bread with American soldiers. Major Carter, describing the weight of sending young soldiers into harm's way. Colonel Carter, trying to explain why she couldn't come home for Christmas because her unit needed her. General Carter, in her final letter, writing about retirement and coming home to help take care of the woman who'd supported her through it all. Mom had been proud of my service, proud enough to save every word I'd sent her. She'd attended my promotion ceremonies when she could, displayed my military photos on her mantle, introduced me to her friends as my daughter, the General. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd understood the sacrifices, the time away, the weight of responsibility that came with the rank. She'd never complained about missed holidays or postponed visits. She'd just loved me and been proud of me and kept my letters in a special box beside her bed. I packed the letters carefully, wondering who else would understand their significance. To Derek at the moving company, they'd just be paper, worthless sentiment taking up space in a box. To me, they represented a lifetime of service, a mother's love, a connection that death couldn't break. Thursday night, I fell asleep on Mom's couch, too exhausted to drive home. I woke Friday morning with cricks in my neck and the certain knowledge that I wasn't going to finish in time. Half the house remained untouched. The basement workshop, the attic, the kitchen cabinets, the bathroom medicine cabinet still full of medications and memories. At 7:30, I called Hartwell Family Moving. "This is Derek. This is Margaret Carter. I have your moving truck coming at 8. I need to ask for more time." Silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Ma'am, we discussed this. You needed to be ready by 9. I know what we discussed. I'm asking for help. I'm 62 years old. I'm doing this alone, and I've been working 18-hour days. I need maybe 3 more hours. I can't authorize that. The truck has 2 other jobs today. Derek, please. This is my mother's house. These are family heirlooms. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for 3 hours. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but if you're not ready by 9, we'll have to reschedule for next week." That means rebooking, and with the short notice, there'd be additional fees. Additional fees for what? Missed appointment fee? Rescheduling fee? Probably another $300. $300 I didn't have for the crime of being human, of needing help, of being unable to do the impossible in the time they'd allotted. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart exactly, but something close to it. "I'll be ready," I said, and hung up. At exactly 8 a.m., the Hartwell family moving truck pulled into Mom's driveway. It was enormous, much bigger than I'd expected, with the company logo painted on both sides and a phone number promising professional service you can trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek climbed out of the passenger side, clipboard in hand, looking around the property with the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s, stretched and yawned like he'd rather still be in bed. A third man, younger and muscular, emerged from behind the truck, carrying moving straps and looking bored. I met them at the front door, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Good morning, I'm Margaret Carter." Derek nodded without making eye contact. "Morning, this is Jim, our driver, and Tommy, our loader. You ready for us to take a look?" I led them through the house, showing them what I'd managed to pack and what still needed attention. The living room and 1 bedroom were done, boxes stacked and labeled, ready to load. The dining room was half finished, with Mom's china still unwrapped on the table. The kitchen remained completely untouched. Jim whistled low when he saw the basement workshop. "Lady, This is going to take all day just to sort through. You got 40 years of tools down here." "I know," I said quietly. "I ran out of time." Derek made notes on his clipboard, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this isn't what we agreed to. You said you'd be packed and ready." "I did my best." "Your best isn't good enough. We can't load loose items. Everything has to be boxed or wrapped. Our insurance doesn't cover damages to unprotected items." Tommy, the young loader, was examining Dad's workbench. "Some nice tools down here. This drill press is vintage. Worth some money." "It was my father's," I said. "He was a carpenter before he retired." "Yeah, well, it needs to be wrapped and padded if you want it moved," Derek interjected. "Same with everything else down here." I looked around the basement, at the lifetime of projects and repairs that had kept Dad busy in retirement. Hand tools hung neatly on pegboards. Power tools sat on shelves, still clean and oiled even though no one had used them in years. Coffee cans full of screws and nails and washers, sorted by size and type. A man's sanctuary, organized and cared for, waiting for someone who would never return. "How long would it take to pack all this?" I asked. Jim shrugged. "With proper packing? Rest of the day, easy, maybe longer." "And you can't wait?" Derek's expression was answer enough. "Ma'am, we have a schedule to keep. You knew the terms when you signed the contract." "What are my options? We can take what's already packed. The rest stays behind. Or we can reschedule for next week with the additional fees we discussed." I felt the walls closing in, the impossible situation becoming hopeless. Next week meant paying fees I couldn't afford, assuming I could even get more time off from my part-time job at the library. It meant another week of living with this weight, another week of sorting through memories alone. "Could I pay extra for your crew to finish the packing?" Derek shook his head. "Not with cash payment. Insurance liability." I explained this already. Standing there in Dad's workshop, surrounded by the tools that had built tree houses for my children and repaired broken toys and fixed whatever needed fixing for 40 years, I felt something break inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like resignation. The acceptance that some things were too big for one person to handle alone, that sometimes the system won and there was nothing you could do about it. "Take what's packed," I said quietly. "Leave the rest." Derek nodded, already turning toward the stairs. "Jim, Tommy, start with the living room boxes. Stack them near the truck. I'll do the inventory." As the crew began loading, I wandered through the house one last time. In the kitchen, Mom's coffee cup still sat in the sink. The one she'd used the morning before she went to the hospital for the last time. Her reading glasses lay folded on the counter beside a book she'd never finish. The magnetic poetry on the refrigerator still spelled out "Love Always" in her careful arrangement. In her bedroom, the drawers I hadn't had time to pack held 70 years of accumulated treasures. Jewelry that wasn't valuable to anyone but her. Photos of grandchildren who visited twice a year. Birthday cards from friends who had passed away. The detritus of a life lived fully, now destined for a dumpster because I couldn't afford professional help and couldn't do it alone. Through the window, I watched the crew load boxes into the truck with mechanical efficiency. No care for the contents, no understanding that each box held pieces of 2 lives, 2 generations of memories and milestones. To them, it was just cargo. Weight to be distributed, inventory to be counted, a job to be finished so they could move on to the next one. Jim called out from the driveway. "Ma'am, we're ready for payment." I walked outside, manila envelope in hand, feeling like I was paying for my own defeat. Derek met me halfway, invoice ready. "Total comes to $3,650, he said. 50 less than your deposit covered the difference. I counted out bills, watching my life savings transfer from my hands to his. "When will my things arrive in Riverside? Truck unloads tomorrow morning. You'll need to be at the destination address by 8 a.m. to accept delivery. And if I'm not there? Storage fees start immediately. $50 a day until you arrange pickup." Of course they did. One more way the system was designed to punish people who couldn't afford its conveniences. I nodded, folded the empty envelope, and walked back toward the house. "Ma'am?" Derek called after me. "We're done here. Truck's ready to roll." I turned back to face him, this young man who'd never known what it meant to have your choices stripped away by circumstances beyond your control. "I need a few minutes alone in the house. We really need to get going. Next appointment's at 11. Just 5 minutes." Derek checked his watch, sighed with theatrical patience, and nodded. 5 minutes. I walked back inside and stood in the empty living room where Mom had spent the last years of her life. The walls looked naked without her pictures, the space hollow without her furniture. 43 years of marriage, of raising children, of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and quiet evenings reading, reduced to vacant rooms and carpet indentations where furniture used to stand. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet where she'd kept her special dishes, the ones reserved for holidays and company, still there, still beautiful, still waiting for celebrations that would never come. I took down one plate, a delicate china piece with tiny pink roses around the rim, and held it up to the light. Mom had served me my wedding cake on this plate. She'd used it for my promotion party when I made colonel. It had been her mother's before that, and her grandmother's before that. I wrapped the plate carefully in a kitchen towel and carried it with me as I walked through each room one final time. The house felt different now, not empty exactly, but released, as if it knew its time was ending and was ready to let go. Outside, the crew was making final preparations, checking straps and closing doors. Derek stood by the truck's cab, still checking his watch, still eager to be anywhere else. "Ready?" he asked as I approached. I nodded, clutching the wrapped plate against my chest. "Thank you for your help." It wasn't entirely true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. They'd done what they'd contracted to do, nothing more, nothing less. The fact that it wasn't enough wasn't really their fault. It was just the way things were when you couldn't afford to make them different. As the truck pulled away, carrying half of my mother's life toward an uncertain future, I stood alone in the driveway of the house where I'd grown up. The for sale sign still stood by the mailbox, but now it sported a red sold banner across the top. In 3 days, new people would move in, create new memories, fill the emptiness I was leaving behind. I unwrapped Mom's plate and held it up to catch the morning sunlight. It was beautiful, delicate, irreplaceable, and it was mine to keep, the one thing I'd saved from the wreckage of impossible circumstances and insufficient resources. Sometimes, that's all you can do. Save one beautiful thing, and hope it's enough to remember the rest. But this story was far from over. The next morning, I stood in the parking lot of my apartment complex at 7:45 a.m., watching for the Hartwell family moving truck. I'd barely slept, my mind cycling through everything that had been left behind. Dad's tools, Mom's china, photo albums dating back to the 1950s, Christmas ornaments that had decorated our tree every year of my childhood. Gone now, destined for a charity pickup or worse. My new apartment was small, just a one-bedroom place I could afford on my library salary and modest military pension. I'd measured carefully before signing the lease, calculating how much of Mom's furniture would fit, how many boxes I could stack without creating a fire hazard. Even with the reduced load, it would be tight. The truck arrived 15 minutes late, pulling into the complex with a grinding of gears that woke half the neighborhood. Same crew as yesterday, though they looked even less enthusiastic about being there. Derek emerged from the passenger seat, looking like he'd rather be having dental surgery. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," he called, though he hadn't bothered to remember my name correctly yesterday. "Apartment 2B, right?" "Unit 2B, yes. Second floor." Jim, the driver, was already surveying the narrow staircase that led to my floor. "Those stairs are going to be a problem. No way we're getting furniture up there without scratching the walls." "The lease says I'm responsible for any damage to the hallways," I said. "I'll cover whatever needs to be fixed." Tommy, the young loader, laughed. "Lady, you don't have any idea what moving damage costs. These property management companies charge like they're repairing the Sistine Chapel." I didn't respond. There was no point explaining that I understood exactly what damage costs, that I'd spent the last 3 years watching medical bills consume everything I'd saved over 30 years of service. They wouldn't understand, and I didn't owe them my story. The unloading process took 2 hours, most of it spent navigating those narrow stairs, with boxes that seemed heavier than they had going into the truck. I followed behind each trip, watching my possessions get stacked haphazardly in the small living space, trying to visualize how I'd ever organize it all. Derek handed me the final invoice when they finished. Delivery complete. Sign here. I signed, and they were gone within minutes, leaving me alone with 37 boxes, 4 pieces of furniture, and the overwhelming task of making it all fit into a space designed for someone with far fewer memories. I spent the rest of that day unpacking, trying to find places for things that had lived comfortably in a 3-bedroom house with a full basement and attic. Mom's dining room table dominated my tiny living room, leaving barely enough space to walk around it. Her china cabinet stood against one wall like an elegant refugee from a more spacious life. By evening, I'd unpacked half the boxes and run out of places to put things. The rest would have to wait, stacked in corners until I could figure out what to keep and what to let go. It felt like losing Mom all over again, this gradual release of the physical evidence of her existence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at Mom's table, surrounded by the chaos of a life in transition. The wrapped plate from yesterday sat nearby, still precious, still beautiful, still the one thing I'd managed to save completely intact. That's when I noticed the envelope propped against the sugar bowl, my name written across it in careful script. I didn't remember packing it, didn't remember seeing it among Mom's things. Inside was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before she passed. "My dearest Maggie," it began, using the childhood nickname only she had ever used. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're dealing with all the practical things I should have organized better. I'm sorry for that, sweetheart. I always meant to get my affairs in order, but there never seemed to be enough time. I know you'll try to save everything, to preserve every memory, every possession that connects us to the life we built in that house. But I want you to know that the things don't matter, not really. What matters is what you carry inside you, the strength and compassion and sense of duty that made me proud every single day of your life. You've spent your career taking care of other people, looking out for soldiers who needed guidance, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. You've carried more weight than most people could imagine, and you've done it with grace and honor. Now it's time to take care of yourself. Don't let the burden of keeping my memory alive become a burden that weighs you down. I don't need monuments or museums. I need you to be happy, to find peace, to know that you've done enough. You've always done enough. The house will sell, the things will find new homes, and life will go on. But the love between us, the pride I feel when I think of the woman you became, the gratitude I have for every sacrifice you made, for your country and your family, that lives forever. That doesn't need to be packed or moved or preserved. It just is. Be kind to yourself, my brave girl. You've earned the right to rest. All my love, Mom. P.S. Check the bottom drawer of my jewelry box. There's something there that belonged to your grandmother, something I always meant to give you." I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words by the end. Then I went to Mom's jewelry box, sitting unopened on my dresser, and found the bottom drawer. Inside was a small velvet pouch containing a pair of pearl earrings, simple and elegant, with a note attached. These were my mother's wedding earrings, and her mother's before that. 4 generations of strong women who loved their families and served their communities. Wear them when you need to remember who you are. I held the earrings up to the light, marveling at their simple beauty. They weren't worth much in monetary terms, but they carried the weight of history, of women who had faced their own impossible circumstances with grace and determination. For the first time since Mom's funeral, I felt something ease in my chest. Not the grief, that would always be there, but the crushing weight of responsibility I'd placed on myself to preserve everything, to be worthy of the sacrifices she'd made. The next few weeks passed quietly. I organized what I could fit, donated what I couldn't, and slowly began to make the small apartment feel like home. I found a routine that worked around my part-time schedule at the library, discovered a coffee shop within walking distance, made tentative connections with neighbors who seemed kind and respectful of privacy. I felt the moving company chapter of my life was closed, filed away with all the other experiences that had shaped me but no longer required daily attention. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the move, I received a phone call at work from someone claiming to be with Hartwell Family Moving's corporate office. The voice was professional, slightly nervous, apologetic. "Ms. Carter, this is Jennifer Walsh from Hartwell Corporate. I'm calling about your recent move from Carbondale to Riverside. We've received some feedback about your experience, and I wanted to follow up personally." I set down the book I'd been cataloging and gave the call my full attention. "What kind of feedback?" "Well, it seems there may have been some miscommunication about the level of service we provided. Our franchise owner in the Riverside area has some concerns about how your move was handled." "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your crew did exactly what they contracted to do. That's part of the issue, actually. It appears you were quoted for basic transport when you should have been offered our full-service veterans package." I felt my pulse quicken. "Veterans package?" "Yes, ma'am. Hartwell Family Moving has had a military appreciation program for over 10 years. Qualified veterans receive significant discounts on packing services, extended scheduling flexibility, and enhanced insurance coverage. It should have been the first thing our representative offered when you mentioned your service background." "I never mentioned my service background." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, according to our records, you're listed as General Margaret Carter, U.S. Army, retired. Is that incorrect?" The world seemed to shift around me. "How did you get that information?" "It's part of our standard verification process for military discounts. We run all customers through a database check. Your record came back with full service history, commendations, final rank. Our Riverside office should have flagged it immediately." I sat back in my chair, pieces of a puzzle I didn't know existed suddenly falling into place. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. When your database check revealed my military record, who had access to that information?" "The franchise owner, definitely. The manager who handled your quote. It should have been noted in your customer file." "And the crew who handled my move?" "They would have had access to the customer file, yes, including any special service notes or military status indicators." My hands were trembling now, not from weakness, but from something much deeper. They had known. Derek, who had dismissed my cash payment as suspicious, who had refused to offer any flexibility on timing or services, who had treated me like a potential scammer trying to cheat the system, had known exactly who I was the entire time. "Jennifer," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need to understand something. What exactly does your veterans package include?" "Full packing services at no additional charge, flexible scheduling, priority booking, enhanced insurance coverage, and a 40% discount on transport fees. For someone of your service record and rank, we would also typically assign our most experienced crew and provide a customer service liaison for the entire process." I calculated quickly in my head. 40% off the transport fee would have brought the cost well within my budget. Full packing services would have eliminated the impossible timeline. Flexible scheduling would have meant no arbitrary 9 a.m. deadline. "And this program has been in place for 10 years? "Yes, ma'am. It's one of our company's proudest initiatives. We've helped thousands of military families with their transitions." "Jennifer, I need to ask you a difficult question. Is it possible that your Riverside office chose not to offer me these services despite knowing I was eligible?" Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am, that would be a serious violation of company policy. And frankly, it would be illegal discrimination under federal veterans protection laws." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Jennifer apologizing repeatedly and promising a full investigation. She offered to send a crew back to Carbondale to pack and transport everything I'd been forced to leave behind, at no charge. She offered refunds, upgrades, and what amounted to a complete do-over of my entire moving experience. I thanked her politely and said I'd consider her offers. But what I was really considering was something else entirely. The realization that Derek and his crew had looked at an elderly woman paying cash, had assumed she was someone to be dismissed and managed rather than served, and had chosen to withhold services she was legally entitled to receive. They had seen Margaret Carter, the broke retiree who couldn't afford proper moving services. They had failed to see General Carter, who had spent 30 years earning the right to be treated with dignity and respect. The question now was what to do about it. That evening, I called my daughter Sarah in Portland. She was the practical one among my children, the one who had inherited my sense of justice and my unwillingness to let wrongdoing slide. "Mom, you have to report this," she said after I'd explained the situation. "This isn't just bad customer service. This is discrimination. I'm not sure I want to make a federal case out of it, literally. It's not about making a case. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to the next veteran who needs help. How many other people do you think they've treated this way?" She was right, of course. This wasn't about me anymore, or even about the belongings I'd lost. It was about the principle that service should be respected, that those who had dedicated their lives to protecting others deserved better than contempt and dismissal when they needed help themselves. "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd document everything. Every conversation, every email, every phone call. I'd file complaints with the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney General's office, and the Federal Veterans Affairs Department. And then I'd make sure every veteran in Illinois knew which moving company to avoid." That night, I sat at Mom's dining room table with a legal pad, reconstructing every detail of my experience with Hartwell Family Moving. The initial phone calls, the meeting with Derek, the arbitrary restrictions, the dismissive treatment, the discovery that they had known all along who I was and what I was entitled to receive. As I wrote, something else became clear. This story wasn't really about moving companies or military discounts or even veterans' rights. It was about invisibility, about how easy it becomes to dismiss people when you see them only as problems to be managed, rather than human beings deserving of respect. I had spent 30 years in uniform commanding the respect of everyone I encountered. Soldiers snapped to attention when I walked into a room. Subordinates addressed me as General and Ma'am and meant it. My opinions carried weight. My decisions affected thousands of lives. My presence demanded acknowledgement. But strip away the uniform, the rank insignia, the visible markers of authority, and I became just another elderly woman with limited resources and unlimited problems, someone to be processed efficiently and forgotten quickly. The realization stung, but it also clarified something important. If this could happen to me, with my education and experience and sense of entitlement to decent treatment, what happened to veterans who didn't have those advantages? What happened to the young enlisted soldiers who came home damaged, struggling, without the confidence that comes from years of leadership? I thought about Corporal Martinez, who had served under me in Iraq, who had come home with PTSD and a Purple Heart and no idea how to navigate civilian bureaucracy. I thought about Sergeant Johnson, who had lost her leg to an IED and faced endless battles with insurance companies and service providers who saw her disability as an inconvenience. How many of them had been dismissed, ignored, treated as problems, rather than people? How many had accepted poor treatment because they didn't know they deserved better, or because fighting the system required energy they didn't have left? By midnight, I had filled 8 pages with notes and was no closer to sleep. Instead, I was closer to something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of mission. Not the abstract duty to country that had guided my military career, but a concrete obligation to use my privilege and position to make things better for those who came after me. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh back. "Jennifer, I've decided to accept your offer to complete my move properly, but I want to add some conditions." "Of course, ma'am. Whatever you need. I want Derek and his crew to handle the second move personally. I want them to pack everything they left behind, transport it safely, and deliver it with the same level of professionalism they should have shown the first time." "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's the best approach. We have other crews who are more experienced with our premium services." "I'm sure you do. But Derek needs to understand what he did wrong, and he needs to have the opportunity to do it right. If he's going to continue working with military families, he needs to learn how to recognize and respect their service. And if he refuses, then you'll know exactly what kind of employee you have, and you can make appropriate decisions about his future with your company." Jennifer agreed, though I could hear the reluctance in her voice. We scheduled the return trip to Carbondale for the following week, with explicit instructions that Derek's crew would provide full packing services for everything that had been left behind. I spent the week preparing for a confrontation I wasn't sure I wanted but knew was necessary. Not for revenge, but for education. Not to punish Derek for his assumptions, but to help him understand the cost of those assumptions to the people on the receiving end. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil or in corporate boardrooms. Sometimes they're fought in the everyday interactions between human beings, in the choice to see dignity where others see only problems, in the decision to offer respect even when it's not demanded. And sometimes, a retired general has to teach that lesson to a young man who never learned that rank isn't always visible, but it's always earned. The morning of the return trip to Carbondale dawned gray and humid, the kind of August day that promised thunderstorms by afternoon. I had driven down the night before and stayed at a small motel near Mom's house, wanting to be there early to unlock the doors and prepare for what I hoped would be a very different experience than the first time. At 7:30 a.m. I stood in the empty driveway of the house that was no longer mine, keys in hand, watching for the Hartwell family moving truck. The new owners had been gracious about allowing one final cleanup, though they'd made it clear they expected everything to be removed by the end of the day. No extensions, no excuses, no room for the kind of arbitrary timeline management that had characterized my first encounter with Derek's crew. The truck arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. Same vehicle, same logo promising professional service, but something felt different as it pulled to a stop. Derek emerged from the passenger side, but his usual casual confidence was missing. He looked nervous, checking his clipboard multiple times, straightening his company polo shirt, glancing toward the house like he was approaching a minefield. Jim and Tommy followed him toward the front door, their expressions similarly subdued. Whatever conversation had taken place between them and corporate had clearly made an impression. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," Derek said, and this time he got my name right. "We're here to complete your packing and transport as discussed." "General Carter," I corrected quietly. "And yes, I appreciate you coming back." Derek's face went pale. He stopped walking, looked down at his clipboard, then back at me with an expression I recognized from countless military encounters. The look of someone who had just realized they'd made a significant error in judgment. "Ma'am, General, I owe you an apology." "You owe me professional service," I replied. "The apology is between you and your conscience." I unlocked the front door and led them into the house, which felt even more hollow than it had a week ago. The rooms I'd managed to pack were completely empty now, just carpet indentations and faded spots on the walls where furniture had protected the paint from decades of sunlight. But the kitchen, basement, and attic remained exactly as I'd left them, waiting for someone with time and care to sort through the remnants of 2 lives. Derek surveyed the remaining work with what appeared to be genuine assessment rather than the dismissive glance he'd given it before. "General, we'll need several hours to pack all this properly. Corporate has authorized us to take whatever time is necessary." "What changed?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "I got educated," Derek said simply. "About your service record, about our company policies, about what I should have offered you the first time." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "About what it means when someone spends 30 years in uniform and then gets treated like they're trying to scam a moving company." Tommy had disappeared into the basement and was calling up the stairs. "Derek, you need to see this workshop. This isn't just random junk down here." We descended the wooden steps into Dad's domain, where 40 years of careful organization still reflected the mind of a craftsman who believed in keeping his tools clean and his workspace orderly. Tommy stood beside the drill press, running his hands over its cast-iron surface with something approaching reverence. "My grandfather had one just like this," he said quietly. 1950s Montgomery Ward, probably. Built like a tank, runs forever if you take care of it." He looked up at me with new interest. "Your father was a serious woodworker, carpenter by trade, cabinet maker by passion," I said. "He built every piece of furniture in this house except Mom's piano." Jim had found Dad's hand tool collection and was examining a wooden plane with obvious expertise. "This is a Stanley Bailey No. 4, probably from the 40s. Still sharp, still true. Someone knew what they were doing with this." For the first time since I'd met them, Derek's crew was seeing the objects in this house as more than items to be moved. They were recognizing the care and skill and love that had shaped each tool selection, each organizational system, each corner of this space that had been Dad's sanctuary. Derek watched his crew's reaction, then looked at me with something that might have been understanding. "General, we're going to pack every single item in this house like it's going to the Smithsonian. Your family's things deserve that level of care." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. What followed was a masterclass in professional moving services. Tommy and Jim worked methodically through the basement, wrapping each tool individually, padding the power equipment with blankets, creating custom boxes for collections of small hardware. They asked questions about function and value, sorted items logically, labeled everything clearly. Derek handled the kitchen himself, wrapping Mom's dishes and glassware with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. He found the good china I hadn't been able to reach in the high cabinets, the serving pieces I'd forgotten about, the mixing bowls Mom had inherited from her mother and used for every birthday cake of my childhood. "This set is beautiful," he said, holding up one of Mom's teacups to the light. "Real porcelain hand-painted roses, probably worth quite a bit." "It's worth everything," I said. "Mom served me tea from those cups when I came home on leave. Every homecoming, every holiday, every important conversation we had happened around that china service." Derek nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. "We'll pack it like crown jewels." As the morning progressed, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't during the first move. These men were working with purpose and care, taking time to do things properly, treating my family's possessions with the respect they deserved. More importantly, they were treating me with the professional courtesy I'd earned through 3 decades of service. Around noon, Derek called a break for lunch. The crew sat in the shade of Mom's old oak tree, eating sandwiches and drinking cold water, while I provided a brief history of the house and the family who had lived there. "My parents bought this place in 1981, I said. "Dad was finishing his last few years as a carpenter. Mom was working part-time at the elementary school. They planned to stay here through retirement, watch grandchildren grow up, grow old together in the house they'd made their own." "Did they get to do that?" Tommy asked. "Dad made it to 79. 22 good years in this house, lots of projects, lots of family gatherings. Mom had 14 more years after that, most of them happy despite missing him. She died in the hospital, but she lived in this house right up until the end." Jim gestured toward the basement workshop. "Your dad taught you to use those tools?" "Some of them. I was always more interested in maps and strategy than woodworking. But he made sure I knew how to fix things, how to solve problems with my hands as well as my head. Said it was important for officers to understand how things actually worked, not just how they were supposed to work." "Smart man," Derek said. "That's practical leadership." After lunch, they tackled the attic, which had been my greatest source of dread. Decades of Christmas decorations, boxes of photographs, clothing that had been saved for reasons no one could remember, furniture that was too good to throw away but not quite good enough for daily use. The accumulation of a lifetime, stored in a space that required crawling through narrow passages and breathing dust that had settled over years of benign neglect. Tommy volunteered to go up first, assessing the situation and creating a plan for safe removal. "It's pretty full up here," he called down, "but it's organized. Everything's in boxes or wrapped. Someone took care to store this stuff properly." "That was Mom," I said. She couldn't bear to throw things away, but she couldn't stand clutter either. So everything went to the attic, neatly labeled and carefully preserved. They created an assembly line, with Tommy passing boxes down to Jim, who carried them to Derek for assessment and repacking when necessary. Each box revealed a different era of family life. Christmas ornaments from the 1960s, when I was small and the holidays seemed magical. School papers and report cards from my children's elementary years. Photo albums from military functions, promotion ceremonies, change of command events. Derek paused over one box that contained my military memorabilia. Certificates of commendation, unit awards, photographs from various assignments around the world. He lifted out a framed photograph of me in dress blues, taken after my promotion to Brigadier General, and studied it carefully. "General, may I ask about your service? I mean where you served, what your specialty was." I gave him the abbreviated version. ROTC at Georgetown, commissioning as a second lieutenant. Assignments in Germany, Korea, Iraq, Kuwait. Finally, the Pentagon for my last tour before retirement. Personnel and logistics management, with a focus on supply chain efficiency and soldier welfare programs. Iraq, Jim said, looking up from a box of photo albums. What years? 2003 to 2005, then again from 2007 to 2009. Both times at division level, managing personnel rotations and equipment logistics. I was there 07 to 08, Jim said quietly. 101st Airborne. We always said the supply folks were the real heroes. You could fight all day, but if the beans and bullets didn't show up, none of it mattered. What was your unit? I asked. 2nd Brigade, 302nd. We worked mostly around Mosul, some operations south toward Baghdad. I felt a chill of recognition. 2nd Brigade, you would have fallen under 3rd Corps Logistics Command. I ran that supply chain for 18 months. Jim stopped what he was doing and stared at me. You were the general who fixed the body armor shortage. That was a team effort. A lot of good people working that problem. Ma'am, with respect, that was you. Word came down from division that some general had raised hell with the Pentagon and told them our guys were dying because of procurement delays. 3 weeks later, every soldier in my unit had proper armor. Saved lives, no question. The attic work continued, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. These men no longer saw me as a customer to be managed or a problem to be solved. They saw me as someone who had looked out for soldiers like them, someone who had made decisions that affected their safety and well-being in combat zones thousands of miles from home. Tommy found a box of letters I'd written to Mom from various deployments, similar to the collection I'd discovered in her room but from a different perspective. These were the letters I'd kept copies of, the ones that documented not just personal thoughts but professional challenges, ethical dilemmas, the weight of leadership in wartime. General, Derek said, holding up one of the letters, would it be appropriate for me to ask what it was like? Making those kinds of decisions, I mean. Knowing that what you decided affected so many people. I thought about it for a moment, trying to find words for something I'd never really discussed with civilians. Every decision felt permanent, even when it wasn't. Every supply request, every personnel rotation, every equipment allocation could mean the difference between soldiers coming home safely or not coming home at all. You learn to check your work multiple times, to consider consequences you hope you'll never see, to live with the responsibility even after you've done everything possible to get it right. Must have been lonely, Tommy observed. Command always is, to some extent, but it's also the greatest privilege a soldier can have. Those young men and women trust you with their lives, with their families' futures, with everything that matters to them. That trust isn't something you take lightly or ever really get used to. Jim wiped dust from his hands and looked at me directly. General, I need to tell you something. The supply improvements you made, the attention to detail, the way you fought for better equipment and faster delivery times, that stuff mattered. Not just tactically, but for morale. We knew someone back at division gave a damn about whether we had what we needed to do our jobs and get home safely. That was the point, I said simply. Every soldier deserves to know that someone's looking out for them, that their welfare matters to the people making decisions. By late afternoon, they had packed and loaded everything remaining in the house. Not just the items I'd been forced to abandon during the first move, but things I hadn't even known were salvageable. Kitchen gadgets I'd forgotten about, books from Dad's library, tools that had been buried under other equipment in the workshop. Derek approached me as they were making final load calculations. Clipboard in hand, but his manner completely different from the dismissive efficiency he displayed during our first encounter. General Carter, he said formally, I need to apologize not just for the service you received last week, but for my attitude and assumptions. I saw an elderly woman paying cash and assumed you were trying to get something for nothing. I failed to recognize your service, your sacrifice, and your right to be treated with dignity and respect. Derek, I said, the military teaches you to judge people by their actions, not their circumstances. You saw someone you thought couldn't afford quality service, and you decided that meant they didn't deserve it. That's a character issue, not a training issue. He nodded, accepting the criticism without defensiveness. You're right, and I want you to know that it won't happen again. Not just with military families, but with anyone who walks into our office needing help. I hope that's true, but hope isn't enough. What changes are you going to make to ensure it doesn't happen again? Derek had clearly thought about this. First, proper training on military recognition and veteran services for all customer-facing staff. Second, a review process for any situation where we consider denying services or accommodations. Third, a customer advocate system so people have someone to call when they feel they're not being treated fairly. That sounds like a good start, but the most important change has to be personal. You have to decide whether you're in the business of helping people during difficult transitions or just moving boxes from one place to another. As the truck was loaded and secured, Tommy approached me with something in his hands. It was Dad's wooden plane, the one Jim had admired in the workshop. "General, I wrapped this separately and labeled it fragile. My grandfather always said, a man's tools tell you everything you need to know about his character. Your father took care of his tools, which means he took care of his work, which means he took care of his family. This needs to be handled with respect." I accepted the wrapped tool, feeling its familiar weight, remembering Dad's hands guiding mine as he taught me to shave wood into paper-thin curls. "Thank you, Tommy. That means more than you know." The drive back to Riverside was different this time. Derek rode in the truck cab, while Jim and Tommy followed in the company van, everyone understanding that this delivery was about more than just completing a service contract. When we arrived at my apartment complex, they didn't complain about the narrow stairs or worry about wall damage. They simply did the work, carefully and professionally, until every box and piece of furniture had been placed exactly where I wanted it. As they were finishing, Derek handed me an envelope. "General, this is a refund of the full amount you paid for the original move, plus compensation for the inconvenience and additional costs you incurred. It's not enough, but it's what the company authorized me to offer." Inside the envelope was a check for $4,000, more than I'd paid for both moves combined. But more importantly, it was acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that my treatment had been unacceptable, and that the company took responsibility for making it right. "Derek," I said, "I want you to understand something. This was never about the money. It was about respect, about recognizing that every customer deserves professional service, regardless of their circumstances. You learned that lesson, which means other people won't have to go through what I experienced." "Yes, ma'am. And General? I've been thinking about what you said about helping people during transitions versus just moving boxes. I think I want to be in the helping business." After they left, I stood in my small apartment surrounded by Mom's furniture and Dad's tools and 40 years of family memories now finding new places in a different kind of home. The dining room table still dominated the space, but now it felt purposeful rather than overwhelming. The china cabinet held the good dishes I'd thought were lost forever. Dad's toolbox sat in a corner, ready for the small repairs and projects that would help me make this place truly mine. I opened one of the photo albums and found a picture of myself from my change of command ceremony when I'd assumed leadership of the logistics division in Iraq. Young, confident, wearing the uniform that had defined my identity for 3 decades. The woman in that photograph had never imagined she'd someday need help moving her mother's belongings, or that asking for help would require fighting for basic dignity and respect. But maybe that was the point. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, it just changes form. Instead of looking out for soldiers under my command, I was now responsible for looking out for veterans navigating civilian systems that didn't always recognize or appreciate their contributions. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh at Hartwell Corporate. "General Carter," she said, "I hope yesterday's service met your expectations." It exceeded them. Derek and his crew provided exactly the kind of professionalism your company should be known for. I'm glad to hear that. And I want you to know that we've implemented several policy changes based on your experience. Better training, clearer protocols, stronger oversight of franchise operations. That's important, I said. But I have another request. Of course. What can we do for you? I want to work with your company to develop a veterans advocacy program. Not just discounts and preferential service, but real support for military families dealing with transitions, moving assistance, storage solutions, connecting families with other resources they might need. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. That's a significant undertaking. It would require funding, staffing, partnerships with veteran organizations. It would also require someone who understands both military culture and civilian business operations. Someone who knows what it's like to serve, and what it's like to need help navigating systems that aren't designed with veterans in mind. Are you offering to consult on this program? I'm offering to lead it. Part-time, initially, but with the authority to make real changes and the support to implement them properly. 2 weeks later, I had a new job title and a new mission. Director of Veteran Services for Hartwell Family Moving, responsible for developing and implementing programs that would ensure no military family ever received the treatment I'd experienced in that cramped office in Riverside. The work was challenging, requiring me to draw on skills I'd developed over 30 years of military service while learning new ones specific to civilian business operations. I traveled to franchise locations, training staff on military recognition and service protocols. I partnered with veterans organizations to provide comprehensive support services. I developed policies that went beyond simple discounts to address the real challenges military families faced during transitions. Most importantly, I made sure that every Hartwell employee understood that their job wasn't just moving possessions from one place to another. Their job was helping families during some of the most stressful and emotional times of their lives, treating each customer with the dignity and respect they deserved regardless of their circumstances or ability to pay premium rates. 6 months later, Derek was promoted to regional manager, tasked with implementing the new Veteran Services program across 3 states. Tommy started his own moving company, specializing in military relocations. Jim returned to school to study business management, planning to open a nonprofit organization serving homeless veterans. The program we developed became a model for other companies in the moving industry, then expanded to include partnerships with storage facilities, real estate agencies, and financial services companies. What started as one woman's fight for basic respect grew into a network of support services that helped thousands of military families navigate civilian life with dignity and assistance. But the most meaningful change was personal. I had discovered that retirement didn't mean the end of service, just a different way of serving. Instead of managing supply chains for soldiers in combat zones, I was helping veterans and their families access the resources they needed to build new lives in civilian communities. The work gave me purpose beyond preserving memories and managing grief. It connected me to a community of people who understood both the pride and the challenges of military service. It reminded me that leadership isn't about rank or authority, but about using whatever power you have to make things better for the people who come after you. Every morning, I sat at Mom's dining room table with my coffee and my laptop, planning programs and reviewing cases, and corresponding with franchise owners across the country. The table that had once seemed too large for my small apartment now felt like the perfect command center for a new kind of mission. And sometimes, when the work was especially challenging or the bureaucracy particularly frustrating, I would reach for Dad's wooden plane and run my fingers over its smooth surface, remembering his lessons about taking care of your tools so they could take care of you. Some battles are won with superior firepower or tactical brilliance. Others are won with patience, persistence, and the willingness to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible. The most important battles are often the ones fought not for glory or recognition, but for the simple principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, that's what service really means. Not the uniform or the ceremonies or the salutes, but the daily decision to use whatever skills and resources you have to make the world a little better for the people who need help the most. Derek had been right about one thing. There was a choice to be made between helping people during difficult transitions and just moving boxes from one place to another. I was grateful that when the choice mattered most, he had chosen to help. 2 years after that transformative morning in Mom's empty house, I received a phone call that reminded me why the work mattered, beyond policies and procedures and corporate initiatives. The voice on the other end was young, female, and barely holding together. "General Carter? My name is Maria Santos. I'm calling about your veterans program. I don't know if you can help me, but I don't know who else to call." I set aside the quarterly report I'd been reviewing and gave her my full attention. "Tell me what's happening, Maria." "My husband deployed to Afghanistan last month. Army Reserve, his first deployment, and they're saying it could be 18 months. We've got 3 kids, and I just found out I'm losing my job at the end of the week. Budget cuts." Her voice cracked. "We can't afford our rent without his civilian salary, so we have to move out of our house and in with my mother in Phoenix. But the moving companies I've called, they all want money up front that I don't have." I reached for a notepad, already making notes. "Maria, where are you located now?" "Fort Collins, Colorado. My mom's in Phoenix, so it's about 700 miles. I've got to be out of the house by the 15th. That's 10 days from now." The kids are in school, they don't understand why daddy's gone, and now we have to leave the only home they've ever known. How old are your children? 8, 6, and 4. The baby keeps asking when daddy's coming home, and I don't know what to tell him. This was exactly the kind of situation our program had been designed to address, but hearing the desperation in Maria's voice made it personal in a way that spreadsheets and policy manuals never could. This wasn't about customer service metrics or corporate social responsibility. This was about a military family in crisis, facing the kind of impossible choices that happen when service members deploy and everything else falls apart. Maria, I want you to listen to me carefully. You're going to be okay. We're going to help you move your family safely to Phoenix, and you're not going to pay anything for that service. Can you give me your address and phone number? I spent the next hour on the phone with Hartwell's Phoenix franchise, coordinating a priority move for the Santis family. Full packing services, careful handling of children's belongings, flexible timing to accommodate school schedules, temporary storage if needed. The kind of comprehensive support that should have been automatic for any military family in distress. But more than the logistics, I coordinated something else. I called the local military family life counselor at Fort Carson, arranged for someone to visit Maria and help her access other resources she might need. I contacted the Phoenix Veterans Center to connect her with job placement services and childcare assistance. I made sure she had phone numbers for military family support groups, financial counseling services, and emergency assistance programs. Most importantly, I made sure she understood that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness or failure. It was what military families did for each other, part of the unwritten code that no one gets left behind, whether in combat zones or civilian communities. 3 days later, I flew to Denver and drove up to Fort Collins to personally oversee Maria's move. I wanted to see how our policies worked in practice, but I also wanted to meet this young mother who had reminded me why the work mattered. The Santis house was a modest ranch-style home in a neighborhood of young families, the kind of place where children's bicycles cluttered driveways and basketball hoops stood sentinel over suburban dreams. Maria met me at the front door, looking exhausted but determined, holding her 4-year-old son while her 2 daughters peered around her legs with curious eyes. "General Carter?" she said, as if she couldn't quite believe someone with my title would show up at her door. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, I did," I said simply. Military families look out for each other. That's how it works. The Hartwell crew arrived exactly on time, led by a supervisor named Rachel who had completed our enhanced veterans training program. She approached Maria with the kind of respectful professionalism that had been missing from my own first encounter with the company, introducing herself and her team, explaining the process, asking about special concerns or fragile items. But what impressed me most was how she talked to the children. She crouched down to their level, learned their names, asked about their favorite toys and which belongings were most important to them. She assured them that their things would be packed safely, and that their new room in Grandma's house would be just as good as their old room, maybe even better. "We're going to take extra special care of everything," Rachel told 6-year-old Isabella, who was clutching a stuffed elephant. "And Ellie the elephant can ride in the truck cab with me so she doesn't get scared during the long drive." As the packing began, I watched Rachel's team work with the same meticulous care Derek's crew had eventually shown at Mom's house. They wrapped picture frames carefully, labeled boxes clearly, treated each possession as if it belonged to their own family. But more than that, they worked around the children's routines, took breaks when the baby needed attention, helped Maria manage the emotional chaos of dismantling a life. Maria and I sat at her kitchen table while the crew packed around us, talking about her husband's deployment, her job search, her fears about starting over in a new city. She showed me pictures of Sergeant Santos in his uniform, standing proud and serious beside his unit's colors, looking impossibly young for someone carrying such responsibility. "He joined the reserves to help pay for college," Maria explained. "We never thought he'd actually deploy. I mean, we knew it was possible, but it always seemed like something that happened to other people." "How are you handling it?" "Some days better than others." The kids ask questions I can't answer. They want to know why Daddy had to go away, why he can't just come home if we need him. How do you explain duty and service to a 4-year-old? I thought about my own children, grown now with families of their own, who had asked similar questions during my deployments. You tell them Daddy went to help people who needed protection, and that helping people is what good soldiers do. You tell them he's coming home, and that while he's gone, other people are going to help you because that's what military families do for each other. Is that really how it works? When it works the way it should, yes. That's what we're trying to build. By afternoon, the house was empty except for suitcases and the possessions they would drive to Phoenix in their own car. The children had handled the day better than expected, turning the packing process into a game of treasure hunting and helping the movers identify which boxes contained their most important belongings. Rachel approached Maria with the final paperwork, a single sheet acknowledging that all services had been completed to satisfaction. No bill, no charges, no hidden fees or unexpected costs. "Mrs. Santos," Rachel said, "your belongings will arrive in Phoenix tomorrow afternoon between 1 and 3 p.m. My colleague Sandra will be handling the delivery, and she has your mother's address and phone number. Is there anything else we can do to help with your transition?" Maria stared at the paperwork, then at Rachel, then at me. "I don't understand. How much do I owe?" "Nothing," Rachel said simply. "This is part of our military family support program. Your husband is serving overseas, and you're serving here by keeping your family together while he's gone. This is our way of saying thank you." Maria started crying then, not the desperate tears of someone overwhelmed by impossible circumstances, but the grateful tears of someone who had discovered that help existed when they needed it most. Her children gathered around her, not understanding why Mommy was crying but knowing somehow that it was okay, that these were good tears. "General Carter," Maria said, "I don't know how to thank you. A week ago, I thought my family was falling apart. Now I feel like maybe we're going to be okay." "You were always going to be okay," I told her. "You just needed some help getting there." The next morning, I flew to Phoenix to check on the delivery personally. Maria's mother lived in a modest house in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where extended families helped each other through difficult times, and everyone knew their neighbor's business. Mrs. Hernandez, Maria's mother, met me at the door with the kind of warmth that comes from raising children who turn out well despite difficult circumstances. She had converted her garage into a temporary apartment for Maria and the grandchildren, complete with partition walls and a small kitchenette. "I told Maria she should have called me months ago," Mrs. Hernandez said as we watched the children explore their new temporary home. "Family helps family. That's how we raised our children." "Sometimes it's hard to ask for help," I said, "especially when you're used to being self-sufficient." Military families, they're proud people. My late husband was Army, Korea, and Vietnam. I know how it is. The delivery went smoothly, with Sandra's crew placing furniture and boxes exactly where Maria wanted them. The garage apartment was small, but it was clean and safe and filled with love. The children adapted quickly, turning the close quarters into an adventure, helping Grandma in her garden, playing with neighborhood kids who spoke both English and Spanish. But the most important moment came when Isabella found her box of art supplies and immediately began drawing a picture of their new home. In her 6-year-old's perspective, the house was enormous, surrounded by flowers and sunshine, with a big front yard where she and her siblings could play safely while they waited for Daddy to come home. "It's beautiful," I told her, studying the crayon drawing that showed their new life in the optimistic colors of childhood resilience. "Grandma says Daddy will be proud of us for being brave," Isabella said. "Are we being brave, General Carter?" "You're being the bravest family I know." That evening, Maria and I sat on Mrs. Hernandez's front porch while the children played in the yard and the desert sunset painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. She had already connected with the Veterans Center, had 2 job interviews scheduled for the following week, and had found a preschool program for her youngest son. "General Carter," she said, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't called your program, where we would have ended up. What would have happened to my kids? You would have figured something out. Military spouses always do. Maybe. But it would have been so much harder, and the kids would have suffered more." I thought about my own journey, from that dismissive encounter with Derek in the Hartwell office to sitting here watching a military family rebuild their lives with dignity and support. That's why the work matters. Not because we're saving people who can't save themselves, but because no one should have to face impossible circumstances alone. Over the following months, I stayed in touch with Maria as her family settled into their new life. She found a good job with a Phoenix school district, working with children who came from military families and understood the challenges of frequent moves and deployed parents. The children thrived in their new school, made friends, learned Spanish from their grandmother, and counted down the days until Daddy would come home. Most importantly, Maria became an advocate herself, connecting with other military spouses in similar situations, sharing resources and support, building the kind of community network that made difficult transitions more manageable. She understood now that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was part of the strength that kept military families together despite the challenges of service life. But Maria's story was just one of hundreds that crossed my desk as the Veteran Support Program expanded. There was the retired Navy chief who needed help moving his disabled wife to a care facility near their daughter. The young Marine veteran struggling with PTSD who had to relocate for specialized treatment. The Air Force widow whose husband had died in a training accident, leaving her to raise 2 teenagers alone while dealing with financial hardship. Each case required different solutions, different partnerships, different approaches to complex problems. But they all shared common elements. People who had served their country facing challenges that civilian systems weren't designed to address, needing advocates who understood both military culture and the resources available in civilian communities. The program grew beyond moving services to include partnerships with storage companies, real estate agencies, financial counselors, and job placement services. We developed relationships with military family organizations, veteran service agencies, and community support groups. Most importantly, we trained staff to recognize that their job wasn't just providing services but connecting military families with comprehensive support networks. 3 years after the program launched, Hartwell Family Moving received the Secretary of Veterans Affairs Award for Community Service, recognizing our work, supporting military families during transitions. The ceremony was held at the National Press Club in Washington, with representatives from veteran organizations, government agencies, and corporate sponsors. I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of people who understood the importance of the work, who had dedicated their own careers to serving those who served. But my mind wasn't on the award or the recognition or the corporate achievement. I was thinking about Maria Santos, now settled in Phoenix with a good job and happy children, counting down the final months until her husband's deployment ended. I was thinking about Derek, who had grown from a dismissive young manager into a regional leader passionate about serving military families. I was thinking about all the families we had helped, all the crises we had turned into manageable transitions, all the dignity we had restored to people who deserved better than they had been receiving. Most of all, I was thinking about Mom, who would have been proud to see her dining room table serving as mission command center for an operation that helped military families in crisis. She had understood service in her own way, through the quiet support she had provided during my career, the sacrifices she had made without complaint, the strength she had shown during her final illness. The award was nice, but the real measure of success was simpler. It was Maria's children drawing pictures of their new home with crayons and hope. It was Derek learning to see dignity where he had once seen only problems. It was the phone calls from grateful families, the letters from veterans who had found help when they needed it most, the knowledge that we had created something that would outlast any individual involvement. After the ceremony, I flew back to Chicago and drove to the small cemetery where Mom and Dad were buried. Their headstone was simple granite with their names, dates, and the words "beloved parents" carved beneath. I sat on the bench nearby and told them about the award, about the program, about the difference we were making. But mostly I told them about the lesson they had taught me through their own example, about service that doesn't end with retirement but simply changes form, about using whatever skills and resources you have to make life better for people who need help, about the dignity that comes from treating every person as worthy of respect, regardless of their circumstances. The next morning, I sat at Mom's dining room table with my coffee and laptop, reviewing cases and planning programs, and corresponding with franchise owners across the country. Outside my small apartment window, Riverside was waking up to another ordinary Tuesday, people heading to work and school and the daily routines that make up most of life. But there was nothing ordinary about the work we were doing. Every case file on my computer represented a family in transition, a veteran navigating civilian systems, a moment when someone who had served their country needed help and found it. Each successful resolution was a small victory against the indifference that treats people as problems to be managed rather than human beings deserving of dignity. My phone rang, and I answered it automatically, ready for whatever challenge the day would bring. "General Carter?" This is Lieutenant Colonel Williams, Fort Stewart. I have a young sergeant here, single father, getting medically retired after an IED injury. He needs to relocate closer to family for support with his daughter, but he's dealing with some mobility issues and limited resources. I wondered if your program might be able to help. I reached for a fresh notepad and started taking notes. Another case, another family in need, another opportunity to demonstrate that service members and their families don't face difficult transitions alone. Tell me about his situation, I said, already thinking about resources and partnerships and solutions. Because that's what service really means. Not the ceremonies or the recognition or the awards, but the daily decision to answer the phone when someone needs help, to use whatever power you have to make impossible situations manageable, to remember that dignity and respect aren't privileges to be earned but rights to be protected. In the end, that's the story worth telling. Not about moving companies or corporate policies or business innovations, but about the simple truth that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity during their most vulnerable moments. About the power of one person willing to stand up and say, "This isn't acceptable," when others are willing to accept injustice as normal. About the recognition that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just finds new ways to make a difference in the lives of people who need advocates, champions, and sometimes just someone willing to answer the phone and say, "We're going to help you through this." That morning, sitting at Mom's table with Lieutenant Colonel Williams on the phone and another military family's future in my hands, I understood finally what Dad had meant about taking care of your tools so they could take care of you. The skills I had developed over 30 years in uniform weren't tools that became obsolete at retirement. They were resources that could serve military families for as long as I was able to use them, and that felt like the most important mission of all. 5 years had passed since that transformative day in Derek's cramped office, and I found myself preparing for what would be my final official act as Director of Veterans Services for Hartwell Family Moving. The company had decided to expand the program nationwide, partnering with other service industries to create a comprehensive support network for military families. My role was evolving from hands-on case management to strategic oversight, which meant training my successor and transitioning to an advisory position. The successor I had chosen was Maria Santos. She sat across from me at the conference table in Hartwell's Chicago headquarters, reviewing files and taking notes with the same methodical attention to detail I remembered from our first conversation 5 years ago. The desperate young mother who had called me from Fort Collins was gone, replaced by a confident professional who had earned a master's degree in social work while raising her children and building a career in military family advocacy. "The Henderson case is going to be challenging," Maria said, reviewing a file about a Marine veteran with traumatic brain injury who needed specialized housing accommodations. "The insurance company is refusing to cover adaptive equipment for the moving truck, and the receiving facility in Tampa doesn't have experience with TBI patients. What's your recommendation?" I asked, though I had already reviewed the case and formed my own opinion. Multi-agency approach, VA medical social worker for the clinical piece, Wounded Warrior Project for equipment funding, and I want to send our most experienced crew with additional training on cognitive disability accommodation. The extra cost comes out of our emergency assistance fund. I nodded approvingly. Maria had learned to think systematically about complex problems, considering not just immediate logistics but long-term outcomes for the families we served. More importantly, she had maintained the empathy and personal connection that made our work meaningful rather than just bureaucratic. Approved. What else? The quarterly numbers look good. We've assisted 437 families this quarter, with a satisfaction rating of 96%. But I'm concerned about sustainability as we scale up. The larger we get, the harder it becomes to maintain personal service. This was the central challenge of any successful program: how to grow without losing the qualities that made it effective in the first place. I had seen military units face the same dilemma, balancing efficiency with the personal relationships that created unit cohesion and effectiveness. What do you think the solution is? Regional coordinators with military backgrounds, each responsible for no more than 50 cases at a time, maintain the personal touch while creating enough redundancy that families don't fall through cracks if someone gets overwhelmed or leaves the program. And how do we fund that level of staffing? Maria smiled, the expression of someone who had learned to think strategically about resource allocation, corporate foundation grants, veteran service organization partnerships, and honestly, we make the case to Hartwell that this level of service generates more business than it costs. Military families talk to each other. Word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied customers are worth more than any advertising campaign. She was right, and she had learned to speak the language that corporate executives understood. The program had indeed generated significant business for Hartwell, not just from direct military customers, but from civilian families who chose a company known for treating people with dignity and respect during difficult transitions. After our meeting, I walked through downtown Chicago toward the train station, thinking about the changes 5 years had brought. The city looked different somehow, more vibrant, as if my own renewed sense of purpose had changed my perception of everything around me. Or perhaps it was simply the satisfaction of knowing that the work we had built would continue without me, guided by people who understood both its importance and its practical requirements. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek, now Regional Vice President for the Western States. "Just wanted you to know, the Stanford family move went perfectly. Dad's ALS is progressing, but we got them relocated to Portland near their daughter without any complications. Mom sent cookies to the crew." These updates had become routine over the years, but they never lost their impact. Each successful case represented a family's crisis resolved, a veteran's transition made manageable, a moment when the system worked the way it was supposed to work. Derek had become one of our most effective advocates, his transformation from dismissive functionary to passionate champion, serving as proof that people could change when they understood the real consequences of their actions. The train ride back to Riverside gave me time to reflect on my own transition. At 67, I was ready to step back from daily operational responsibilities, but not ready to retire completely. The advisory role would allow me to stay connected to the work, while having more time for the grandchildren who were finally old enough to be interested in their grandmother's stories. More importantly, it would give me time to work on the book I had been thinking about for years. Not a memoir exactly, but a guide for veterans transitioning to civilian careers in service industries. How to translate military leadership skills into corporate environments. How to recognize and address the needs of military families. How to build programs that created lasting positive change rather than just temporary fixes. Back in my apartment, I sat at Mom's dining room table and opened my laptop to work on the first chapter. The table had served as command center for hundreds of cases over the past 5 years. But tonight it felt different. Less urgent, more reflective, like a place where wisdom could be shared rather than problems solved. I started typing, trying to capture the lessons learned from that first humiliating encounter with Derek through thousands of successful interventions that followed. "Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform," I wrote. "It evolves into new forms, finds new applications, discovers new ways to make a difference in the lives of people who need advocates and champions. The skills you developed in military service, the values you embraced, the sense of mission that defined your career, these don't become obsolete at retirement. They become resources that can serve others for as long as you're willing to use them." As I wrote, I thought about all the people who had shaped this journey. Mom, whose quiet strength had taught me that dignity was something you maintained regardless of circumstances. Dad, whose careful attention to tools and craftsmanship had shown me that quality work was its own form of service. Derek, whose transformation had demonstrated that people could change when confronted with the consequences of their assumptions. Maria, whose growth from desperate caller to program director proved that crisis could become opportunity with the right support. Most of all, I thought about the hundreds of military families we had served, each with their own unique challenges but all sharing the common experience of having served something larger than themselves. They had trusted us with their most precious possessions, their most vulnerable moments, their hopes for new beginnings in unfamiliar places. Around midnight, I received an email that reminded me why the work would continue to matter long after I stepped away from daily operations. It was from Isabella Santos, now 11 years old and apparently staying up past her bedtime to work on a school project. "Dear General Carter," she wrote in the careful script of someone who had been taught that thank you notes were important. "My mom told me to write to you about my social studies project on heroes. I picked you because you helped my family when my dad was deployed and everything was scary. I remember when the moving people came to our house and you were there. And you made sure all our stuff got to Grandma's house safely. But mostly I remember that you weren't scared when Mom was crying. And you told us we were brave. My dad came home safe, and now we have our own house again. But I still remember that you helped us when we needed help the most. My teacher says heroes are people who help other people even when it's hard. I think you're that kind of hero. Thank you for helping my family." Love, Isabella. I read the email 3 times, each reading bringing fresh tears. This was why the work mattered, beyond statistics and satisfaction ratings and corporate recognition. It mattered because children remembered kindness, because families shared stories, because dignity preserved in one moment could inspire confidence that lasted years. The next morning brought my final case review meeting, a marathon session covering active files that would transition to Maria's oversight. We worked through complex situations involving deployed reservists, disabled veterans, military widows, and active-duty families facing unexpected relocations. Each case required individual attention, creative problem-solving, and coordination between multiple agencies and organizations. But the meeting that really mattered came afterward, when Derek flew in from Denver for what had become an annual tradition, lunch at a quiet restaurant where we could talk honestly about the program's evolution and the lessons we had learned from our unlikely partnership. "General," he said as we settled into a corner booth, "I need to tell you something I've never said directly. That day in Mom's house, when you made me understand what I had done wrong, that changed everything for me. Not just how I treat customers, but how I think about my responsibility to other people. Derek, you changed yourself. I just provided some context. No, it was more than that. You showed me that my assumptions about people were wrong, and that those assumptions had real consequences for families who needed help. You made me understand that my job wasn't just moving boxes, it was helping people during some of the most stressful times of their lives." He pulled out a folder containing photographs and letters from families his teams had served over the past 5 years. Military moves, but also elderly couples relocating to assisted living, young families dealing with job transfers, people escaping domestic violence situations who needed special security considerations. Every one of these families got treated with the same respect and care we would have given you if I had recognized your service from the beginning, Derek said. That's your legacy, General. Not just the military program, but the understanding that everyone deserves dignity regardless of their circumstances. After lunch, we walked through downtown Chicago, 2 people who had started as adversaries and become unlikely partners in building something meaningful. Derek had to catch a flight back to Denver, but before he left, he handed me a small wrapped package. "This is from all the franchise owners who've implemented the Veterans Program," he said. "We wanted you to have something to remember us by." Inside was a crystal paperweight engraved with the words General Margaret Carter, Service Beyond Uniform, and the dates of my tenure as program director. Simple, elegant, and somehow perfect for someone who had never needed elaborate recognition but appreciated sincere gratitude. That evening, I called each of my children to tell them about the transition and my plans for the future. They were proud of what I had built, excited about the book project, and relieved that I would finally have more time for family visits and grandchildren's soccer games. But the conversation that mattered most was with my youngest grandson, 8-year-old Michael, who had inherited my curiosity about how things worked and my impatience with unfairness. "Grandma," he said during our weekly video call, "Mom says you're retiring from your helping job. I'm stepping back a little, but the helping will continue. Other people are going to do the daily work now. But why did you start helping people move their stuff? I mean, why was that important?" I thought about how to explain complex concepts to someone who hadn't yet learned that the world wasn't always fair, that good intentions weren't always enough, that sometimes you had to fight for dignity that should have been freely given. "Because everyone deserves to be treated nicely when they need help," I said finally, "and sometimes people forget to be nice, so other people have to remind them. Like when kids are mean at school and the teacher has to tell them to stop? Exactly like that. Sometimes grown-ups need teachers too. Are you going to keep being a teacher? In different ways, yes? That's what the book is for, to teach people how to help other people better." Michael nodded seriously, already planning his next question. But what he said surprised me. "Grandma, I want to be a helper too when I grow up." "Can you teach me?" "I can teach you what I know," I said. "But the most important thing you already have." "What's that?" "A heart that cares when other people are treated badly. That's where all helping starts." 2 weeks later, I officially transitioned to my advisory role and began working on the book in earnest. The writing came easier than expected, perhaps because the stories were all true, the lessons hard-earned, the wisdom gained through years of practical application rather than theoretical study. But the chapter I returned to most often was the first one, about recognizing that retirement wasn't the end of service but the beginning of a different kind of mission. About understanding that the skills developed over a military career had civilian applications that could benefit communities, organizations, and individuals who needed advocates and champions. Most importantly, about the recognition that dignity wasn't something to be earned through rank or achievement, but something to be protected and preserved for everyone, especially during their most vulnerable moments. The book would be finished eventually, but the real legacy was already complete. Maria would lead the program to new levels of effectiveness and reach. Derek would continue transforming corporate culture one franchise at a time. Hundreds of military families would receive the support they deserved during difficult transitions. And somewhere in Phoenix, Isabella Santos would grow up knowing that help existed when people needed it most. That service came in many forms, and that ordinary people could choose to be heroes simply by treating others with dignity and respect. That was enough. That was everything. On my final official day as Director of Veteran Services, I sat at Mom's dining room table one last time in a professional capacity, reviewing the transition documents that would guide Maria through her first months in the role. Everything was organized, labeled, cross-referenced, ready for someone else to carry forward. As the sun set over Riverside, I closed my laptop and looked around the small apartment that had served as mission headquarters for 5 years of meaningful work. Tomorrow I would still be here, still available for advice and consultation, still connected to the program I had built. But tonight felt like completion. Not an ending, but the satisfied conclusion of a chapter that had restored my sense of purpose and reminded me that service could take many forms, that dignity was worth fighting for, and that sometimes one person standing up for what was right could create changes that lasted far beyond their direct involvement. In the kitchen, I made a cup of tea using Mom's china, the good cups that had seemed too precious for daily use, until I realized that every day we were alive was precious enough to deserve the good china. I carried the cup back to the dining room table and raised it in a quiet toast to all the families we had helped, all the dignity we had restored, all the service that would continue long after I stepped away from daily operations. Outside my window, Riverside settled into evening quiet, ordinary people ending ordinary days, unaware that their world was a little better because someone had chosen to transform personal injustice into systematic change, individual dignity into institutional policy, one family's crisis into thousands of successful transitions. That was service too. The quiet, unglamorous work of making systems more humane, organizations more responsive, communities more supportive of their most vulnerable members. It might not win wars or make headlines, but it changed lives one family at a time, one dignified interaction at a time, one moment of recognition at a time. And in the end, that was the most important victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.